Announcing the new Pinto three-door runabout. Pure Pinto, front to back. And Pinto is built to go and go and go. See the new Pinto three-door runabout at your Ford dealer. Packs more fun, 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 packs more fun than any little import.
The Pinto, also known as the Widowmaker, is one of the most infamous vehicles ever produced. With over 200 fatalities, the Pinto proved to be the perfect example of failed engineering, corporate greed, and unethical business practices, all wrapped into one. The company responsible for the sudden loss of confidence in the American auto industry was Ford Motor Company. First, we need to head back 50 years, to the year 1968. By then, an invasion of foreign-made goods began dominating the U.S. auto industry.
It's compact, and yet you've got a lot of room in there.
I like the car, but I know a nice young man that would like it, my husband.
The new Toyota Corolla, 1798.
Detroit was in a panic as the Japanese began to gobble up more and more of the subcompact auto market. Meet the company's then president, Lee Iacocca. Lee was a calculating, intelligent, ambitious, and ruthless executive.
Okay, I read the research. You know what I think? I think America's getting an inferiority complex about Japan.
Now that's gotta stop.
The truth is, we've got advantages over the Japanese in every car we make. But nobody knows it. We got more performance cars and more four-wheel drives and more turbos. And who's done more about safety than we have?
That statement still haunts Lee Iacocca till this very day. He pushed for the board to greenlight the Pinto program, and by August 1968, it was underway. The Pinto, also known as Lee's car, would have aggressive targets. Lee demanded it be no more than 2,000 pounds, not a penny over $2,000, and rushed the delivery deadline to just 25 months. As the combination of fast and cheap rarely results in perfection, the Pinto emerged after an accelerated 2-year development cycle, deeply flawed. In order to create more interior room, the Pinto used a steel fuel tank located behind the rear axle and in front of the rear bumper. There were pros and cons to this design. The pro, the Pinto's tank was far less likely to intrude into the cabin space in the event of a rear collision. The con, the fuel tank of the Pinto would rupture in rear collisions involving speeds as low as 25 miles per hour. In a crash, the rear axle housing would make contact with the fuel tank. Combined with the fuel filler neck design, this would lead to fuel spillage, both inside and outside the cabin, and ultimately, fire. The first high-profile accident highlighting this fatal design flaw occurred in May 1972 when a Pinto carrying Lily Gray and her 13-year-old neighbor, Richard Grimshaw, was struck from behind at an estimated speed of 30 miles per hour. Upon collision, its fuel tank ruptured, killing Gray and leaving Grimshaw with third-degree burns over 90% of his body. Miraculously, the boy survived, but his injuries required over 60 surgeries. Unfortunately, the carnage does not stop there. On the afternoon of August 10, 1978, outside of Elkhart, Indiana, 3 teen girls stopped for gas on their way to a volleyball game. The driver was Judy Urish, and her cousin Donna and her younger sister Lynn were also passengers. They were in a 1973 Pinto. At the gas station, the girls accidentally left the gas cap on the roof of their car, and after a mile or so, it slipped off and rolled across the road. Judy decided to slow down. There was a high curb alongside the highway, so pulling off the road was impossible. She got out and she put on her emergency flashers. Coming down the road behind them was a van driven by a 21-year-old man named Robert Duggar. As he reached for another cigarette, he took his eyes off the road. When he looked up, the Pinto was 10 feet in front of him. He could not stop in time. The Pinto exploded into a massive fireball. Shards of glass scattered in every direction. The car spun around and around, stopping 150 feet from the point of impact. The fire almost reached 1300 degrees, melting the sunglasses around Lynn's eyes.
Did you see where the fats burned to the seat, the polyester shirt? Very modern art.
Lynn and Donna were killed instantly. Judy lay in the grass with burns over 95% of her body. The last words, "Help me. Please help me." She died 8 hours later. Needless to say, the results were not encouraging. In both accidents, Ford was brought to trial, and in both cases, was found not criminally liable for the deaths. Further exasperating the problem was a 1977 article in Mother Jones, an article that was published called Pinto Madness. The piece referred to Pinto as a fire trap and a lethal car, and cited 500 to 900 fatal Pinto fires. The report exposed Ford's internal documents dated all the way back to 1970, proving that the company knew about the potential problem. The company knew that the fuel tank created a serious risk of fire, so engineering teams proposed solutions. One was to borrow a design Ford used in its Capri, a tank that sat above the axle and out of the way. Management's attitude was to get the product out of the door as fast as possible, so Ford did a cost-benefit analysis. To fix the problems, it would cost an additional $11 per vehicle, and Ford weighed that $11 against the projected injury claims for severe burns, repair costs, claim rate, and mortality, including the engineering, the production delays, and the parts for 10,000s of cars. The total would have been approximately $113 million. Ford valued a human life at about $200,000, but damage payouts would only cost $49 million. So Ford said fuck it, and the fix was nixed, and the Pinto went into production that year of September 1970. For years, no one sought to verify if any of the sensationalistic data on Pinto crashes was true. But in November 1990, Gary T. Schwartz, a professor at the UCLA School of Law, published an article titled "The Myth of the Ford Pinto Case." Perhaps the most illuminating data comes from the NHTSA fatality rates per million vehicles for 1975 and 1976. In the published chart, the Pinto is responsible for 298 deaths per million cars in 1975, making it on par with the Chevrolet Vega that had 288 deaths and the Datsun 510 that had 294 deaths, but considerably safer than the Toyota Corolla with 333 deaths, the VW Beetle that had 378 deaths, and the Datsun 210 that had a whopping 392 deaths per million cars for the year of 1975. That's almost 100 more. Looking at this data, one could assume that the Pinto was less or the same amount of dangerous, but suppose that we focus on the subset of accidents involving fire. If we just take a look at that subset, we finally see a pattern, which is to say that they may have been as safe or safer than other cars in most respects, but a lot less safe in the exploding fireball category. So, if the statistics showed a clear issue with the Pinto's fuel tank and the company knew about it, why was nothing done? To understand this, let's take another look at another company, Toyota, and Toyota's acceleration problems in 2009 and 2010. These issues all follow the template created by the Pinto case 40 years ago. A company knows about a problem and doesn't fix it. Why not? One of the problems facing the company was sticky accelerator pedals. Drivers would take their foot off the accelerator, and in a small number of cases, the pedal wouldn't spring back up immediately. After 4 cases in Europe were brought to Toyota's attention, the company determined that under conditions of high heat or humidity, the synthetic material used in part of the pedal mechanism was degrading slightly. The primary concern was determining if sticky pedals affected the ability of drivers to stop their vehicles. This question is the hidden factor around which much of the subsequent controversy revolved. If the sticky pedals kept drivers from stopping or materially increased the amount of time required to bring a car to a halt, then the sticky pedals were clearly a safety defect and required immediate corrective action. If, on the other hand, braking performance was unaffected by the sticky pedals, then the engineers felt the pedals were not a safety defect but a consumer satisfaction and component reliability issue. What did the engineers find? When the pedals stuck, it made no difference how quickly the car could be brought to a stop. The brakes were powerful enough to override the problem if applied with sufficient force. Then they looked at the Federal Accident Database and learned that there had been no crash credited to a sticky accelerator pedal. The system was, in their mind, sufficiently tolerant of imperfection. They decided against an immediate recall, choosing instead to redesign the part and introduce it in new model lines. The public saw things very differently. What if an inexperienced driver found his car behaving unexpectedly and panicked? To the engineer, the car sits somewhere on the gradient of acceptability. To the public, the car's status is binary. It's broken or it's working. It's flawed or it's functional. Looking at the Toyota example, we now see what Ford engineers saw with the Pinto gas tank issue. The Pinto was right in the middle of the pack, and at most slightly worse than average. And from an engineering standpoint, this makes sense. But with the loss of life, and the particular way that people lost their lives in a fiery iron coffin made the Pinto's imperfection highly unacceptable. I'm Jeff from Modern Muscle 2 and 3, and this is the truth about the Ford Pinto. Now guys, just ask yourself, what fatal flaws do you think your car company is hiding from you? It could be anything. Drive safely, my friends.
And who's done more about safety than we have? Americans just don't understand the quality of our cars. We got to get people to wake up to the truth.